Marcus here from the Ashland Fly Shop. We're going to keep going with this series of tube flies that we're doing here for BC and beyond. So this is a fly that Will came back home with a couple years ago. He fishes up in BC with Skeena River Lodge, and it's a pattern that's based off of one of their guides up there, Seth Rupert, ties this really cool, you know, light pink marabou tube with these longer fibers coming off of it. If any of you guys are interested, he's CND Steely on Instagram. But this fly is kind of inspired by that. It's got these long tendrils that come off of it, and then just really wispy marabou. And we got that idea from them up there at Skeena River Lodge. So we'll do our best to replicate this guy. So the tube that we're going to tie it on is one of these glitter tubes. You could just do a standard pink tube or something like this. And it won't have the junction in the back like I've often done before, where you have the hook guide to come behind the fly. So instead of starting this fly at the very back of the tube, we'll start above it, and that will just leave this space for the tube for our knot to slide up into the tube there. So I'm going to start towards the back of the tubing here. And I'll work a little thread base going up on the tubing, but not too much. We'll see how much of this tube we actually need to tie the fly. And I'm going to start a dubbing loop at the back of the fly. I'm just going to get a little dubbing ball. For our dubbing today, I'm going to use Senyo's Fusion dubbing in the Pink Lady. I'll pick some of this out. And get it laced up into my loop here. Then I'm going to close the loop. Give it a spin. I'm going to really pick that stuff out because I want that dubbing to kind of come through the fly a little bit. Give it a buggy, flashy look through the back of the fly. And as you wrap that loop, if some of those fibers get trapped down, I'm not super worried about it because you can always just come in after the fact and get them all out of there. Right over the end of this loop, I'm going to start another loop. And in this second loop, I'm going to spin craft fur. So I've got shrimp pink craft fur here. Big old blob of it. So I've got, you could do this a couple different ways. You could just trim it off of the back of the craft fur, or clip it really close to the base. But what I'm going to do is lay this craft fur in my hand like this and just clip it away as evenly as I can, leaving that base and then just having this material sandwiched in my hands here. And then I'll just slide that into my loop. Give her a spin. Before I get too far down the line, I'm going to try and pick that stuff out of there. Just making sure that it's really picked out, because part of what makes this fly really cool is how lightly it's done. So I'm going to wet my fingers and bend back this craft fur, and really what you're left with is this really thin, wispy, almost hackle. I have some heron that I tie with sometimes, and this, these longer craft fur fibers really kind of remind me of how heron looks. Just long, wispy fibers that come through the fly. I'm going to make sure that those are all getting in there without being trapped. And I'm going to tie off that loop. And that just is going to be a material that's got so much movement to it. And on top of that, I'm going to use a couple strands of Crinkle mirror flash. And I just clip these off the hank. And I lay 2 in on my near side. Flip them over and put 2 on the far side. Just make sure that those are roughly coming down the length of the fly there. Fluff up this material a little bit. And on top of that, I'm going to use just X-Select Marabou and Shrimp Pink. I'm going to try and pick kind of the ideal spay plume. And what is the ideal spay plume? There's probably a lot of subjectivity in that. But what I look for is thin stem, and the stuff that I really like to work off of. You can see this stem, how thick it is up at the bottom. And when you move the feather back and forth, I like to work off of the stuff where the stem actually has that free range movement, because these fibers that are attached to that skinnier stem up there at the top are going to have a lot more movement in them. So I clipped the feather in half, and then I'm going to peel away what will be a section where I can grab onto this feather. And I don't often do this, but because this fly is meant to be real wispy, I'm only going to use half of our feather here. So I'm going to peel away half of this guy. And I'm just going to be using one part of it. I'm going to tie it in right there. cut off this tip. And I'll grab this stem and start to wrap. And just make sure as I'm wrapping that I'm not trapping any of these feathers in here. Making sure that everything's coming down nice and free. I'm just gonna grab that stem. Tie it off. And we'll be left with a little bright spot up at the top of the fly here. But there, you know, you've just got so much movement, and it's such an easy fly to tie. Easy to cast. I mean, you almost couldn't, for a sink tip fly, you almost couldn't design an easier fly to cast. Just get a little bit of this that I'm going to cut there. And it's worth saying, so this will be a totally unweighted fly, but if you wanted to, in this Pro Tube system, you could just slide a flexi bead over the top of it right there, and then you've got a weighted version of the same fly, which would be a nice little thing to tie it both in weighted and unweighted. But today we're just going to leave that off, and I'm going to finish it up with a series of half hitches. Clip that nice and short. And I'll slide this tubing around. And then I'm just gonna clip that tubing real close, close to the thread. And how we finish all tubes is just by burning away the front end of that tube back onto the thread and just sliding it back into the needle, rotating the needle, making sure that you've got enough room to use that tube down the road. And this is, I often slide them right there. And this is where I use my head cement, which is just Moon Hardhead and clear. I'll just drop a little drop on there and move it around with my bobbin. Anytime if you ever get too much head cement, it's worth saying you can just touch it with your fingers like I just did, and it'll just take it right off there. So there is another easy, effective little tube fly that you'll probably see some iteration of in the bins down the road. Seems like guides up in BC either like black and blue or they like pink. So with this fly and then the previous one we did, you can kind of cover your bases a little bit. But there'll be other versions of these available down the road, I'm sure. So thank you very much for tuning in for this another version of a tube fly here at AFS. Thank you.